He's gonna.
getting ready to.
Okay.
Can you hear us, Councilmember Nutting?
So we'll just turn this on so he can hear us. He is. So I'm just going to ask him if he wants to chair, preside over this meeting, or if he wants to give it to you. Is that
Okay.
Oh, I'll ask him. If he's, or you can ask him. Oh, we still have 3 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Turn this on. I think he's turning on.
There he is.
It's 5 o'clock. Are we ready to go?
Yes, we are. Do you want to chair remotely? It's on. Do you want to chair the committee remotely? Not hearing.
Can you hear us, Jeremy?
Jeremy, can you hear us?
So I'm not sure what to do here.
If you guys can hear me, I can't see any video or hear anything. And it shows on my computer that the City of Des Moines City Council is still muted.
Can you hear us now, Jeremy?
There we go. We can hear people. can't see anything, but there we go.
So
Okay.
he can hear you, so now you're.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you want to chair this remotely?
Yes.
Okay.
So, are we ready to get going?
Yes, we are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Call the March 27th, 2025 Economic Development Committee meeting to order. And the first item on our agenda is the approval of February 27th, 2025 minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, they're approved. And Mayor Buxton, you had a suggestion to get to, what item was that? Was it the,
Actually, sorry, yes. Well, the first item is I was going to ask if I could put item number 4 as item number 2, because I believe that it will be a short, easy discussion, high priority for the city. If we don't get through the agenda, this item has to wait for a month. So I wanted to put it to the top, and then also because we have visitors in the chambers here, to see if we could move short-term rental discussion next after that.
okay, I'm fine with that.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Steinmetz, are you as well?
Yes, I'm fine.
All right, let's move forward with long-range financial plan and development impact analysis, excuse me, and then we will move into the short-term rental discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, Councilmember Nutting. Will you pull up the presentation real quick, Tara? I spoke to the Economic Development Committee in January about this, and so as we get ready to take this forward to the Finance Committee and then the Council for full consideration, I want to just real quickly highlight what will be included in this. So when we spoke about it in January, it was really the concept of, did the council want to take a look at sort of our long-range financial health, but specific to economic development, develop a tool that would allow us to really look at how a particular parcel of land is used and what that would generate as it comes to like revenues, cost of service, and the committee was interested in doing that. So we have negotiated a scope of work and a proposed project that, if this committee likes it, will go to finance and then go to council. That will do two main things. It will do a long-range financial plan. I won't hit on all of that because you had it in your packet, the write-up, but the couple things I want to hit on is it's really a 10-year financial forecast, and it will incorporate different scenarios. It will probably be one that assumes the economy gets worse, one that assumes we stay steady, and one that assumes fabulous things, because those would really impact what our long-term financial health looks like. It will also be identifying where we could generate revenue that we may not be now. We're using a company that does this work all over the state of Washington and in kind of the Northwest. So they have the benefit of seeing some tools other cities use. And then, of course, we'll be looking at bringing a report to the council to sort of give you that full picture. The second part is the development impact analysis. This will develop a model in Excel that, once it's developed, staff can use to take a look at a project based on its land use type and get a sense of the revenue it would generate both through one-time and recurring taxes, as well as the cost of service. You know, for example, a single-family home requires service and use of parks and roads and things like that, whereas, a warehouse isn't going to the park, but there's trucks using the roads. So it looks at that. It definitely won't be granular enough to plug in an exact development, but it will let us look at the use type. So multifamily or, warehouse or something like that. It won't be down to, 200 units at such and such size, but it'll really, I think, be a super helpful tool, not only for the council, but also the planning commission once they get up and going. So the project, if the council wants to move forward, when I take it to them in April, is $68,000. I think this is actually a fair number for the volume of work and the depth they would be going to. It will take about 6 months, and we would propose that about $23,000 of it, the part that's really the development impact analysis, is paid for with the development fund. The remainder would be paid for the general fund, and I'd be using the contract services line item that's in the city manager's budget. So I am looking for any feedback or questions. Otherwise, our next stop will be the Finance Committee next Thursday.
All right, I'll open it to my colleagues if they have any questions or comments.
Yeah,
I see Deputy Mayor Steinmetz.
it sounds a lot like what has previously been discussed, so I don't have
Oh, okay.
extensive questions on it. That's great. I guess how come 6 months? Is that just a volume of data to try to get through and try to understand the timeline? Because
Yeah.
sooner the better.
Yeah,
could
but
use
this
it.
is actually a tremendous amount of work. They're going through historical data. We have to actually provide them a tremendous amount of data that some of it we have readily available, some of it we don't. Also, within the scope of work, there's a lot of back and forth between staff before you guys see a presentation. So I think given the depth of work, 6 months is pretty reasonable. We'll hope it's sooner, but I think that's a pretty reasonable timeline.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Right, Mayor Buxton.
My only comment is, I looked them up, myriad cities in Western Washington have hired them, small and large, so that was nice to see that they were doing this work in all of our sister cities. And the development options analysis, I just wrote, this sounds so good, and I really am gonna look forward to this for us. Thank you.
Yeah, my only comments are is I think this is great. I'm glad we'll have the funds to pay for the services, and it's something I think is needed to be done professionally for a while. So I look forward to this, and hopefully we can get some projects going. So if your direction is to go forward with it, then I think it sounds like my colleagues and I agree.
All right, sounds great. So we'll talk to the Finance Committee, which I think includes one or two of you, next Thursday, and then Council for full consideration of the contract April 10th.
Great.
Perfect, thank you. All right, moving on to the short-term rental discussion.
Good evening, committee. Thank you for considering our draft proposal of the short-term rental ordinance. The purpose of this ordinance is to regulate short-term amenities and rentals. This would allow owners to economically use their property, but also ensure the safety of short-term renters, the safety of the neighborhood, and ensure neighborhood peace. It would also give us a means of enforcing the regulations. Tonight, we're really here just seeking guidance. I believe you've reviewed the ordinance. We did receive a couple of public comments. They seem to only address the amenities rentals. So I guess our first question would be, how does the committee feel about just the short-term rental bit of the ordinance? Is that good?
Colleagues? Deputy Mayor Steinmetz and then Mayor Buxton.
Yeah, I'm pretty complimentary of this. I think you've done a really good job of creating something that is workable, has some flexibility built into it, but gives the city some of the teeth it needs in order to address some of the issues that have cropped up. One of the questions I had earlier that did get answered, but I kind of want to throw it out there so everybody else hears it, is that there are some requirements for the platform. I think it's referred to as the platform, and then I assume that's Airbnb, VRBO, et cetera. How do we enforce those requirements on those platforms?
I'll address this since I responded to your email. Yeah, so that's, these are international corporations, right? They do a lot of business. They're used to working with cities. So generally they police themselves. They will, if they're provided with this local regulations, they'll enforce those. So that would be our first expectation, is the platforms abide by our rules once they're told what our rules are. And then the second piece is, in there we required that they note in the public listing the city's permit number. And so we could do a simple audit just by looking at Airbnbs or VRBOs online and confirm that they're showing that they have a Des Moines license. And if they don't, we notify the platform and they'd have to remove that.
And the platform's been pretty responsive to being notified of something like that in,
Not with us because we don't have the
No.
process, but yeah, that's how they operate and they're used to that. And they're already collecting lodging taxes for the city and remitting them, even though, we haven't told them what our lodging taxes are. I mean, they calculate this stuff and they operate in all sorts of different, obviously, cities, but then in all sorts of different countries too. So they're pretty adept at following local regulations.
and then, sorry, I gotta pull it up here. The local representative piece of this. It doesn't appear to be a requirement that they actually live in the city, but that they can respond within an hour. Is that a physical response, a phone call response? And how do we go about enforcing that?
Yeah, I think what we'd require is an effective response. So, if first we need to be able to get a hold of somebody, or the person renting the house needs to get a hold of somebody, and then they need to get an effective response. So whether that's having the individual come to the house to assess what's occurring, or if they can call a plumber or an electrician, and then let the tenant or the renter know, we contacted someone, they'll be there, tomorrow morning, or they'll be there in a couple hours, or something like that. It's just really about making sure that we have someone that's either can get to the property or that can do something to make sure that the problem's addressed. Just so the concern would be if it was owned by a corporation or something and they didn't have a local person to be able to promptly respond. So that's really the concern, is one, for us to have someone we could call, but also the renter, the customer.
Okay, and that'll be posted in the house, correct?
Yeah, that number would be required.
And if there is, a noise complaint because somebody has decided they rented a party house for the weekend, how do you expect that to look? How does it play out so that everybody can kind of understand that?
Yeah, so that would generally be a neighbor would call our police department, just like they would with any sort of noise complaint. And then because we'd have all these properties registered, we'd be aware that it's short-term rental. We would then either, if it was an emergency of some kind or we had to send an officer, we would do that. We could also contact the local representative and say, hey, we're receiving noise complaints. You need to address this within 30 minutes, or, we're going to respond to the residents and issue citations.
Okay.
So I think the one really piece, and we're certainly open to answering any questions. Additionally, what Tara pointed out was that the draft kind of contains two parts. It's a short-term rental, like an Airbnb that we're all familiar with, and those are the codes are custom. Lots of cities regulate these. We're probably late to the game on that. And so, we were able to look at a lot of examples, take the input from the committee that we heard last time, and really try to come up with kind of a reasonable code that allows people, safe access to rentals, and also allows our property owners to rent their properties if they desire. The other piece of this is the amenity rental, and those are the comments that we received. There are not a lot of amenity rental codes out there, and amenity rentals can be unique. For example, the one that we've received comments on is a pool rental. There's other amenity rentals like you can rent someone's backyard for your dog to spend 30 minutes in, or different things like that. So they're not really all uniform. They can have different impacts. And so that's one thing that we are really looking for input from the committee on, to help us formulate a ordinance that we can then bring back to the council. And so we have received comments both related to amenity rentals. I think it's kind of both sides of the spectrum, where you have one comment from an individual that runs an amenity rental, and then you have one comment from a neighbor that is impacted by that amenity rental. So we really kind of have both sides of this, and I think we received some great comments. And that's really what we need direction on from the committee about, you know, where we draw that line in the middle. We can take questions on this, or if you wanted to talk about some of the comments we received, or.
I have one question about daytime parking. So on page 18, it's addressed, and then it just talks about limiting the number of vehicles for overnight occupants, so that you had a parking limitation just for night. What about daytime parking? So if you've got think if you have a business, a daytime business that you operate out of your home, you have to have a certain amount of daytime parking spaces, and you're not allowed to, let's say you're just gonna operate a little insurance agency, it's a one-person operation or something where people come to your house, or a counseling business or something. Don't you have to have a certain amount of on-site parking, or are people allowed to park on the street for a daytime business? It just says here, comply with all applicable city parking regulations, so I'm not sure if that's what you're
Yeah.
talking about there.
Well, I think generally for our home occupations, we wouldn't expect a lot of vehicle traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm not sure if we have specific codes. I think Rebecca's probably looking for that. Yes, the language in there specifically relates to nighttime parking, that people would need to be on the, and part of that is that these codes are traditionally used for short-term rentals.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, amenity rentals might have different impacts during the days, and so that's something that we could consider if that was the direction of the committee.
And I think with occupancy limits, if we still keep occupancy limits on amenity rentals, you would still limit the parking impact.
I see what you're saying, like this says.
I'm sorry to jump in, guys. Are you? Terrible time hearing anybody right now. And I've got my volume turned off.
Okay. Go ahead.
The off-street parking requirements are set in this code for just overnight parking specifically, but we still have on the site occupancy limits built in, at least as the code's written now, based on, even though it's based on the number of bedrooms in the house, it is written to be for the amenity rental as well, because usually the size of the property that they'd be using is somewhat restricted. And so those occupancy limits would apply to the amenity as it's written. So you wouldn't be able to bring more cars than you'd have more people generally. So it would still limit the number of cars that would be able to take up a place if you kept occupancy limits for those amenities.
Deputy Mayor Steinitz.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me to link those two. The occupancy limits for overnight would be different than occupancy issues for the pool, for example. If I want to have a kid's birthday party at the pool, it would not be unusual to have 20 people there, but as I read this, you'd have to have 10 bedrooms in order to hit that occupancy limit. And I don't know if there are, how many places in Des Moines, and I suspect it's probably a handful at best, that actually have 10 bedrooms. So I think that we need to go back to the drawing board and make a better distinction there between what is the occupancy limits for the amenities and what is the occupancy limits for the overnight. I think the overnight makes sense to, 2 per bedroom kind of thing. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to me for the amenities. But I'd also want to point out, the amenities have a hard stop at 10 p.m., right? And so you're not going to have lots of people there after 10 p.m. And there has been talk about a decibel limit.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And then the next question is, how do we cope with the airport and decibel limits?
Right.
So I think that may need to be played out a little bit more as well.
Yeah, and that was one of the comments we received, was regarding the occupancy limit for amenity rentals versus, short-term rental. We can take a look at that, and prepare some options when we bring this back. The decimal level is something we definitely need to look at, which was based on one of the comments we received. So we'll take a look at that before we bring this back. So we can address both those issues.
And then, one of the other things that really did kind of catch my eye is that how can we distinguish between homeowner use of the pool, just, it's the example, you know, and rental use of the pool in a way that's meaningful, you know, after 10 p.m. or, you know, depending upon what the occupancy limit ends up being.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I mean, a lot of times you can't, right? You could have a party one day of friends, right? And the city really doesn't have any enforcement over that. It's a private party, versus if someone's paying to be there. Now it's a commercial use, so the city does have a little bit of enforcement potentially. What I would say though is we still have nuisance codes. So noise is noise, whether it's a private party or a public party. You know, our noise codes would still apply. So, you know, we could still look at it that way. There were some comments that the city did receive about use of the pool, use of the facility, and its impacts on a neighboring property. Some of those are things that it's just not within the city's authority. Smells, stuff like that, those are civil issues that if you had a neighbor that was doing certain things that you objected to that were essentially or allegedly impacting your property in a negative way, you might have a civil action against them. That's not something the city would be involved in. So I think there's some of that, that maybe some of this could be private property disputes. But certainly for commercial activities, the city does have ability to license and regulate. And it's difficult. It's difficult with kind of this new use of properties and sharing and all that kind of thing that, you know, what's equitable and what, you know, so I think this is the first step, or I guess this is the second step in this conversation, and probably we'll have more steps before we bring something forward to the full council.
So if it's a noise complaint from a neighbor, and Des Moines PD shows up, and it turns out that it's essentially the private party, not the commercial party, that would be subject to the same noise complaint that exists without this code.
Anywhere.
Yes.
Correct? If it's the commercial party, then we have some teeth to go after that, correct?
Yeah, private noise complaint, we could issue an infraction to the property owner. Commercial noise complaint, we laid out a kind of a due process in here, where after a certain number of violations, their commercial license could be revoked, and they'd have to stop operating.
Mayor Buxton.
So along some of these lines, you talk about a little bit different approach or ideology with the short-term rentals versus amenities. Would we put a small or an addendum or a separate section that maybe could address amenities versus your standard? Because I see this as a very standard short-term rental code. Good. 2 thumbs up. But now we've got this other thing. I'm wondering if you put in a separate section that addresses amenities separately, if we wanted to just put this through and work on an addenda, not an addendum, I'm not really, just a separate section. I don't know if this is gonna go under a title, something.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of this does apply to both. And it can, and we've talked to different stakeholders, including representatives from Airbnb, and representatives from these amenity rental platforms.
Okay.
And we've looked at other cities' codes, and generally they're incorporated together,
Okay.
except there's certain things that are just not apples to apples, right?
Right.
And there's certain things we need to consider for amenity rentals versus short-term rentals. So we could certainly look at adding a section in here on items that wouldn't apply to short-term rentals, but would only apply to amenity rentals. And so like I heard, the occupancy limits. That's one, we wrote that down. Potentially daytime parking.
I think that's another.
And so this is where, this is new to us too, so we're looking for input, and we're getting input from the public, which has been great. And so we can incorporate that, and so we're just definitely opening to hear more ideas from the committee about other topics that we could include.
Deputy Mayor Steinmetz.
Yeah, I do think the due process that you put in this applies to both equally. And I think you guys did a really good job of writing up a good due process procedural way to go to enforce this. And so my compliments to you on that. But I think that's one thing that applies equally to both. But I think there are several things that sort of, you need to make a distinction between, does this apply to amenities, and the amenities are defined how, or does it apply to the short-term overnight rentals? So.
All right.
Anything else?
Colleagues, if you have nothing else, I guess my concern is, and I don't remember, I read it early on, I don't remember seeing anything. You touched on the fact that if they continued to violate and get citations, that eventually their business license or their commercial license would be revoked and they would have to cease doing business. My concern is A, how is that going to be enforced? And B, are there fines enough to the corporation or to the private person large enough if they continue to get calls for service at the place, even after their business license has been revoked, that it would sting enough that they would either have to cease or would have to choose to do business in a different manner?
To clarify, is that for the platform or just a single property?
For excuse me, for either like Airbnbs or private. I just overall overarching hand, I guess you would say.
Yeah, so we have, if we revoke a business license, or if someone's operating without a business license, we have some pretty good teeth in our code. We can fine someone $500 a day. And we could also impose, we rarely would, but if we had a business that continued to operate, continued to rack up additional fines, we have the option to pursue that criminally as well.
Okay, so that's in a separate code. Would that be written into this, what we're doing here? I think it's great. It's long overdue, as you stated, and I'm glad that we have plenty of cities to look to and that we're talking about this now. But is it written in a separate code, or is it in this?
It would be in the same title as this. That's our business license title in Title V. And it would apply to any of our licenses. So it would not be in the specific code, but we would reference it as a requirement in this code.
All right. Thank you. Very good. Is there anything else from my colleagues? All right.
No.
So staff, do you have what you need to move forward?
Yeah, so my expectation is we'll put together an updated draft ordinance, and we'll bring it back to this committee, because I think, one, we'll have more discussions with this committee, and hopefully we'll continue to get public comment as well.
All right, very good. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm toggling between screens here. So now that brings us to our sound code discussion. And we have about 20 minutes left.
Thank you, Councilmember Netting, and committee members. So just to kind of quickly recap, I know you have the memo and you've read it, but just to summarize, this meeting is really kind of a continuation of the June 27, 2024 meeting that we've discussed initially what might need to happen in order to bring back a sound code that we originally had back in 2007 with ordinance 1407. And I was tasked to kind of do a little more research and try to figure out maybe some of what's going on at the neighboring cities, and a little bit more about our own sound code and what it might take. So I didn't have a presentation or anything, but basically this is a continuation of that discussion. So kind of to summarize, I had a little bit of history of why it was repealed in 2012, and then now we have this current gap. And some summary of recommendations, basically, I feel that there's when the original sound code was written, it was written under the 2003 building code and energy code. And back then we had let's see, I had it right here. We had so U factor in Windows, for instance. Windows is a big entry of sound. So the lower number is basically U, just factor for is a heat transfer number. So the lower the better, and it just kind of might have indirect impact on sound attenuation. There's the ceiling had requirement for R38, so that's your insulation thickness. Now it's R60. In the walls, it was actually R21. So that hasn't changed much, except that now we have continuous insulation on the outside. What is challenging for just for outside noise, the building codes do not regulate outside noise. They regulate more of the interior from, like if you have a townhome, we don't have this adopted, but it was in my appendix. If you wanted to think about adopting that section appendix, that would regulate townhome noise, but it's between townhomes so that you don't hear your neighbor. It's not necessarily between, for out exterior noise. And so it's not as easy as just, let's make that the exterior as well, because you can't, you can't waive requirements for the energy code, and you can't just pick up one of these listed assemblies and modify them to meet the energy code without violating those listings. So that's where the sound engineer consultant team could help tremendously and help write into a more modern code, if that's the direction that you'd like to go. I did reach out. I reached out to 2 consultants, and I got one response so far. I'm still looking to get another response. The Coffin engineers, at the request of city manager, I did try to get kind of a rough estimate of like what are we looking at for cost-wise, because I know this is a concern. If we are just talking about a very rough, like I gave them kind of our scope, what we're looking at, they came back with like a $20,000 estimate. So of course that could rise the more we ask them to do, but and I would get another quote if you would like, but that is really kind of the overall view of what my memo was, what my research was. I have, you know, come prepared for questions, so if I know you have some, and I'd like to discuss that with you guys.
Really, the direction you're looking for is whether or not this committee is interested in us delving deeper into this, getting a consultant, and really looking at
Correct.
revising the sound code.
Yep.
Colleagues?
Well, thank you. After reading through this, I got a little stressed out, feeling like, you know, is this going to be burdensome or helpful to our residents or interested builders? It increases time and expense of building, repairing, maintaining, and, you know, I was told that it would mostly, because we're mostly built out in residential in the city of Des Moines, but it did, you know, there was a bullet there that talked about compliance methods for both new and existing structures. So, you know, I have a little note here that says on one of these paragraphs, you know, our residents are going to hate us for this. And so I am a little bit concerned about overburdening remodeling projects. And so if we do come back, if we have the option of saying, well, we want it for this but not this, I guess I'm becoming more ambivalent about this, but if we want to move forward, I think sure we can find out. We are working so hard on different kinds of mitigation, complaining about sound. Here's the other thing. I feel like we're working this, but it places the mitigation on the backs of residents and investors. And I would really like it if there would be a way that we could engage the port or somehow to help with this. And maybe that's a whole other conversation. I feel like this is where we're at. It's because it's the sound from the airplanes, and I hate it that we're going to be asking our residents or our people who are interested in investing in our community that it needs to ride on their backs. So,
If I can just make a comment on that. This is also not one size fits all, right? So Dan can get started with this, bring back options and sort of a menu for the council to consider. So, because when we both talked about this, I don't think it's anybody's intent to make it hard to like remodel your bathroom.
Yeah.
So remodel, I think, is a big term, but I think it would really only kick in for extremely significant projects because so much of this is really external. It's really new construction where this comes in. So I don't think it's one or all. So I mean, we can come back with options and sort of some informed information. So we could hire a consultant who says, gosh, all these regulations could be a lot, but if you just implemented these handful, you'd get a lot of bang for your buck, and it would make a big difference in the quality of life for the people living in those facilities. That may be worth it to the council then. So I just don't want you to think it's like a everything or nothing. It's really very customizable to what level the council wants to sort of consider.
okay. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Steinmetz?
Yeah, I mean, I have similar concerns about, you know, putting who's going to pay for this. I think it certainly seems appropriate to look into it for new construction, significant remodel that involves building a new outside wall, that level of change, or new construction. An internal remodel, moving internal walls doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so all of that with the caveat of how much is it going to add to the cost? You know, because that gets to are there 5 simple changes we could put in the code that will not, you know, add $20,000 to the cost of any project, or, is everything going to be impacted $20,000 or more? Because and I'm just picking the number out of the air, but you know those are significant real numbers to people, and that will stop a lot of projects. It will stop the limited amount of new construction that we can do. That'll slow them down. We don't want that. You know, we don't want that from a density standpoint in terms of residential. We don't want that in terms of an economic development standpoint in terms of commercial. We want to be a place that can encourage this, recognizing that we live by an airport and it is a significant issue, you know, in terms of just the peace and quiet of your own property, the ability to get work done productively, you know, and there are some health issues that are involved in people trying to sleep with a lot of noise. And so I think all of those factor in. It's not an easy decision to figure out right where that line is, but I'd like more information on that. Does that help?
It does. It is my understanding that's why we repealed it in the first place, because of the concern of cost, one of the reasons. However, am I getting the direction right? And were we looking at just new construction at this point? Or major remodels,
Yes.
like, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
I got a couple comments.
yeah.
So being one of those that was a part of that, I did a major remodel on the house in 2008 and basically added a second story to the house. So this is the impacts that the STC code, the sound transfer code, impacted me. I had to double sheet my roof with 15/30 seconds OSB as opposed to 7/16, the much cheaper version of it, and one layer. I had to double sheet the exterior of the house with 15/30 seconds OSB as opposed to 7/16, one layer of a much cheaper version of OSB. I had to hat channel the upper floor and then put 5/8 GWB drywall on it, which increased the cost of that process. All of my HVAC, my fans in the bathroom or anything like that had to have 90s in it. I had to replace the windows downstairs and the new windows upstairs. They both had to be 1/4 inch over 3/8 glass with a non-rigid center portion, which took my window package up 40% than what it was. And then I had to double sheet the walls with 5/8 downstairs to mitigate the sound transfer. Overall cost, I don't remember what it increased the project, but I can tell you that it's 30 to 40% more to instate a code like this on homeowners. Commercially, most commercial buildings that I like multifamily buildings in like downtown Seattle, there are commercial STC codes, STCs that take care of some of that mitigation because it's a larger density area, and I'm fine with that. But I have real heartburn over making our builders in a city where we're actually trying to look for economic development and depend on some of that one-time revenue for the projects that we need to do in the city. I think it stymies the ability for the contractor and the developer to do business in our city. So that's my take on it. I don't remember. Did you say it was $100,000 for the consultant?
20.
20,000? I mean, we're still trying to figure out where to get funds for stuff that actually is tangible that we need. I don't think it's prudent right now, and I think it's a challenge for developers and contractors and homeowners alike. I mean, when you're doing a $175,000 remodel and you have to add another 40% to that, when money's so expensive right now and labor's so expensive, I don't think it's prudent, man. That's just my take. So if my colleagues are for it, that's two to one, but I'm not interested in hearing any more. I know exactly what the code was back then. Deputy Mayor Steinmetz.
Yeah, I suppose then we're looking for a motion or a head nod, or I'm not sure.
We're looking for
Well,
direction
we're
on
looking for
whether or not
direction,
you
yeah.
want us to move
Move
forward.
forward with this $20,000
'Cause-
expense.
We, and the, yeah, I
Please turn your
totally
mics
agree
on.
with what he's
Sorry.
saying, so.
Yeah,
Yep,
what
sorry about that.
we are looking for direction on whether or not you would like us to engage a consultant and get any feedback on what potential code amendments could look like.
Colleagues, I turn to you. You heard my piece.
I've got lots of questions and I don't know enough about it. So, yeah, I would like to, I would like to go ahead. So that would be my choice.
Haha, leaves it on me.
Yeah.
So,
You're the deciding vote there, Mayor.
yeah, I know. Right now, here's my, in big writing, we're placing mitigation on the backs of residents and investors. No. I mean, after reading that today, I just was so, not to, this week. Yeah, I mean, if we, can somebody refresh my memory about how this ended up here? We had a vote from the dais that we wanted to remand this to committee for review, correct?
Prior to.
And-
Yeah.
Correct,
And when was that vote? Was that a year ago?
approximately.
Yeah.
And,
Shortly after the vote, if I remember right.
okay. And it had to do with, this is all airport related. Another question I think I have is, we are compliant with national standards right now, the way it is, right?
Yeah.
What we're doing is we're asking for something extra with this community based on our exposure to airplane noise.
Correct.
Can we just bring it back 6 months from now and reconsider it? Or do you, I'm just, yeah, I'm not really in favor of it after everything we've been through with the budget, and we've got other consultants that we're hiring to do other work right now. And, how many, we've probably, I think, 3 things that we're going out for right now, consultants.
We probably have far more than that. There's a lot that don't go to you.
Yeah.
I would actually recommend that we consider exploring this, and here's why. I think the comments from the mayor and Councilmember Nutting are definitely valid, but there's also a lot to be said for the overall value of your community when you start having better housing products there because they're built to better standards and people prefer living there because it's the airport is not as much of a nuisance. Like, it does sort of cut both ways on, I think, what we're really doing for residents. So I think it's hard for us, I think, to ask the port to do more for us when we don't have our own standards in place. Asking for more is a perspective also. But also, we have very little new construction left. So candidly, I don't think this is going to sway things one way or another that much. But, some of our neighboring fellow airport communities do have these ordinances in place. How much that helps or hinders development, I think, would be a good question for them.
The thing that pushes me to reconsider is simply because we did so much research to hire you.
Okay.
And I respect your opinion and your feeling about leading this organization and what you think is prudent. And this is not the final decision here. But, yeah, 20,000, I don't know. 20,000 is small in some conversations. And I know that we're gonna take heat from some other council members who will force it out on us in public if we don't do this. So
How about this? I did not get involved with the consultant Dan spoke to. So, and I mean, Dan did a great job. He talked to them, I'm sure. But I'd love to maybe have a chance to talk to them and sort of talk about how built out the community is, how much land we're actually talking about for new development. And then let's see if this is really worth the effort. I think if we were in a place where we were having large tracts of land to be developed, I would highly recommend we do this for your long-term quality of life for your residents. But that isn't where Des Moines is. So let us scratch a little more. Did you talk to him a lot about how built out we are?
I mentioned it,
Yeah.
they've helped, this consultant helped with the Seattle's sound ordinances, not necessarily, they don't have the same issues we do, but they have environmental sound, so they seemed very familiar and qualified, but I did let them know that we are mostly built out, and how can we address some of the easy stuff for
Yeah.
major remodels. I don't want to have any burdensome thing like he mentioned.
So, if I can suggest, one, have that conversation with the consultant to find out whether there's, thanks for that. Two, is that call the other cities around here that have the sound code and ask what the impact of that sound code has been on their new building, their major remodels. And let's get a little better data points, because those are the things that are going to help us make the decision. The noise reduction coefficient is not where I'm going to make a decision, but I am concerned, and I think it's worth really understanding: is it worth spending any money on, given the scope of what we're asking and given the impact it might have? And so if we can do that and come back in a couple months.
I mean, it's just a phone call. We can
Okay.
And for clarity, this is
Thank you.
single-family residential here. You're not talking, this is not gonna have much of an impact if somebody's building a large apartment complex.
So it's up to you.
Because it was
I mean,
already-
we have, in the original sound code, it affected every building that had occupancy. So it did affect the commercial buildings as well.
Okay,
But like Councilmember Nutting said, that there is a lot of that built into the codes when you're talking about residential commercial buildings. So they don't really have much more to do.
yeah,
But if you're talking about just regular building, office buildings, I mean, they have had all of that in the original code. So the thing about when you're thinking about making an ordinance like this, it's really up to you, because this is above and beyond what state requires. So you don't have to go blanket like that. You could just do pick and choose, and so that's something to chew on too. But it is an option if you're concerned about office workers or whoever is out there in the commercial world, and their noise mitigation. That is something to think about too. But with this refresh, you have the choice of how you want it to narrow it down if you'd like.
So let us get more information. Let us see if we can make this less than 20 and come back.
okay, that is good for me then.
Okay?
That's fine. All right, staff, thank you for all your hard work. We got 5 minutes till council meeting, so do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you guys for all the hard work. See you in a few minutes.